In 1990, a teenage girl in the state of Washington disappeared without a trace, leaving her parents without answers for more than 2 decades. But 22 years later, her father happened upon an old high school yearbook of hers. What he noticed in that moment changed everything. The salty sea breeze, a constant companion in the coastal town of Havenwood Creek, Washington, rattled the windows of the Peterson family home. Inside, the air was thick with silent grief, a palpable presence like dust particles dancing in the faint afternoon light. 22 years, 2 decades and 2 years since their bright, cheerful Lily vanished, just weeks after graduating high school, leaving a void that time only deepened. David Peterson, his face etched with the sorrow of years lost, stood at the threshold of Lily's bedroom. Sarah, his wife, a pale figure beside him, her trembling hand resting on his arm. "Are you sure, David? Are we ready?" she whispered, fragile as a butterfly. He nodded, though readiness was a concept long faded. "We have to do this, Sarah. We agreed. It's time to let go of some part." But the words felt like betrayal. How could they release the last tangible pieces of their daughter? The room was a shrine, frozen in the spring of 1990. Faded band posters clung to the walls, relics of forgotten memories. Textbooks and notebooks lay neatly on the desk, her handwriting like ghostly script on an open history assignment. Her wardrobe, still full of clothes she would never wear again, carried the faint scent of her favorite lavender soap. Each item a fresh cut in the wound, a reminder of a stolen future. After countless painful discussions, they decided today would be the day. They would sort through her belongings, donate what could still help others, and box up the rest to store in the attic. A symbolic ending, perhaps. Though David knew true closure was a myth. He stepped inside, the floor creaking a mournful welcome. Sarah followed, her breath catching in a stifled sob she quickly stifled. David opened the window. The sudden rush of fresh, salty air stirred decades of dust. He sneezed and rubbed his eyes, a simple act weighted with meaning. Starting with the closet, he pulled out faded dresses, worn jeans, a cherished hand-knit sweater. Each item whispered memories. Lily at her senior prom, radiant in a blue gown. Lily muddy but beaming after an intense soccer game. Lily curled up on the sofa in that oversized sweater, lost in a book. He placed them carefully into boxes, one for donations, one for storage, one for keepsakes, though every piece felt like a keepsake. At her desk, piled high with school supplies, he paused. These represented her dreams, her plan to study marine biology at the University of Washington. She had always loved the sea, its vastness and mysteries. The cruel irony, that vastness may have swallowed her whole. As he sorted textbooks and file folders, his fingers brushed against a thick hardcover book he hadn't noticed before. Lily's senior yearbook, the beacon of Havenwood High, 1990. He was startled to realize he had never truly looked through it. During the tormenting months after her disappearance, both he and Sarah couldn't bear to see her smiling face frozen in time alongside classmates who had moved on, building lives and families of their own. He sat on the edge of her narrow bed, the heavy yearbook resting on his lap. It felt important, a piece of Lily's life he had overlooked. He opened it, the glossy pages cool beneath his fingers. He flipped through sports teams, drama club, candid photos of laughing students. Then he found her. Lily Peterson. Her senior portrait. That radiant smile, full of hope and burgeoning adulthood, pierced his heart with familiar, searing pain. 22 years, my dear, he whispered, his calloused thumb gently tracing her face. Daddy needs to find a way to hold you in his heart without this lingering ache. His gaze drifted to the photo beside Lily's. Chloe Maxwell, her best friend. The two had been inseparable, a whirlwind of giggles, shared secrets, and endless sleepovers. Chloe's face sparked another wave of memories, dinners at their table, homework sessions, their chatter filling the house. He hadn't heard from Chloe in years. After Lily's disappearance, she had visited often, her youthful face marked by shared sorrow. But as months turned into a year, then 2, those visits dwindled and stopped. Life, David supposed, had a way of pulling people forward even from the deepest grief. The drive to Miller's Pond took David through the familiar winding roads of Havenwood Creek. Towering Douglas firs lined the route, their ancient branches filtering the sunlight into a dappled mosaic on the asphalt. The air, even away from the immediate coastline, carried the scent of pine and damp earth. It was a beautiful place, this corner of Washington, but for David, its beauty was forever tainted by the shadow of Lily's absence. Miller's Pond was less a pond and more a small, serene lake, fringed by a collection of modest, weathered cottages. Following Sarah's somewhat vague directions, he found a cluster of them tucked away down a gravel lane. He parked his car and looked around, trying to guess which one might be Chloe Maxwell's. Most looked quiet, a few showing signs of life, a cat sunning itself on a porch, wind chimes tinkling softly. He spotted a woman tending a small flower garden in front of a pale blue cottage. As he approached, she straightened up, wiping her brow with the back of a gloved hand. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice friendly. "I'm looking for Chloe Maxwell," David said. The woman smiled. "That's me. Though I haven't been Chloe Maxwell for a long time. It's Chloe Evans now." She pulled off her gardening gloves, her gaze curious. She was in her early 40s. Her blonde hair, once the same vibrant shade as Lily's, now streaked with sun-bleached highlights and the first hints of gray at the temples. Her face, though etched with the fine lines of adulthood, still held a ghost of the teenager he remembered. "Chloe," David began, his voice suddenly thick with emotion. "It's David Peterson, Lily's father." Recognition dawned in her eyes, followed by a cascade of emotions. Surprise, sadness, a flicker of something that looked like apprehension. "Mr. Peterson, oh my goodness." Her composure wavered. It's been such a long time. Please, come in." She led him up the short path to the cottage. The inside was small but cozy, filled with books, plants, and colorful, handmade pottery. It smelled of baking spices and something floral. "Please, sit down. Can I get you some coffee? Or tea?" she offered, gesturing to a small, cluttered kitchen table. "Coffee would be nice, thank you," David said, settling onto a cushioned wooden chair. He placed the yearbook on the table between them. As Chloe prepared the coffee, her movements were deliberate, almost cautious. He could sense her trying to process his unexpected visit. "What brings you here, Mr. Peterson? After all these years?" she asked, placing a steaming mug in front of him before sitting down opposite. David took a fortifying sip of the strong, hot coffee. Sarah and I, we were finally going through Lily's room today." He pushed the yearbook gently towards her. "I found this, Lily's senior yearbook. I realized I'd never really looked through it before." Chloe's eyes fixed on the familiar cover of the Havenwood High Harpoon. "I remember this," she said softly, her fingers tracing the embossed title. A faint, sad smile touched her lips. David opened it to Lily's profile page and pointed to the handwritten note. "She mentioned you and a book, The Secret Garden, the special edition with the silver leaf cover. I was just curious about it. Did you ever return it to her?" Chloe's smile faded, replaced by an expression of profound sadness. "No," she whispered, her gaze dropping to her hands. "No, I didn't. I was such a forgetful kid back then, and Lily always teased me about it." She got up and moved to a bookshelf crammed with novels and art books. After a moment of searching, she pulled out a book. It was indeed The Secret Garden, its beautiful silver-leaf cover slightly dulled with age, the spine creased from many readings. "I kept meaning to give it back," Chloe continued, her voice thick with unshed tears as she handed it to him. "And then, after she disappeared, I just couldn't part with it. It felt like the last piece of her I had." She looked at him, her eyes pleading for understanding. "Would you mind terribly if I kept it? It's become very precious to me." David nodded, his own throat tight. "Of course, Chloe. You keep it, I understand." He opened the book, the pages yellowed and soft. The illustrations were as enchanting as he remembered from when Lily was a child. As he idly flipped through, something slipped from between the pages. A folded piece of glossy paper, acting as a makeshift bookmark. He unfolded it. It was a torn page from a teen fashion magazine, circa 1991 or 1992. It featured a photo shoot with young, aspiring models. A boy with slicked-back dark hair and a cocky smirk caught his eye. There was something unsettlingly familiar about him. "Who's this?" David asked, tapping the image. Chloe leaned forward, her brow furrowing. "Oh, that's Ethan Vance. He was in our year, a bit of a show-off. Thought he was God's gift." She wrinkled her nose. "Lily and we never really liked him." Ethan Vance. The name rang a distant, unpleasant bell. David turned back to the yearbook, flipping through the senior portraits until he found him. Ethan Vance. The photo was less polished than the magazine spread, but the same arrogant confidence was there. "I remember him now," David murmured. "He was quite the aspiring model, wasn't he?" "He still models occasionally, I think," Chloe said, a hint of disdain in her voice. "From what I hear, he owns some kind of boutique marketing agency in Seattle now. Did quite well for himself." She paused, then looked at David, a strange expression on her face. "Why do you ask about Ethan?" "No reason," David said, perhaps too quickly. "Just this page." Lily used his picture as a bookmark. Seemed odd, if she didn't like him. Chloe frowned, looking at the magazine page again. "That is strange. Lily really couldn't stand him. He was manipulative, always trying to get something from people." She hesitated, then continued, her voice dropping. "Actually, Mr. Peterson, now that I think about it, there was a period, just before she disappeared. Lily was acting a bit secretive about Ethan." David's attention sharpened. "Secretive? How so?" "Well," Chloe began, choosing her words carefully, "it was during our senior year, maybe a few months before graduation, Lily started asking me these odd questions about him. Like, did I think someone like Ethan could change if they really wanted to? If maybe he wasn't as bad as we thought? She even asked me to drive past his house once, said she was just curious where he lived. I thought it was weird at the time, because we'd always agreed he was bad news. But Lily always had such a soft heart. She wanted to see the good in everyone, even when it wasn't there." A cold knot formed in David's stomach. "Did she ever say she was involved with him? Romantically?" Chloe shook her head vehemently. "Oh no, definitely not. She was head over heels for Brandon Knox back then, remember? They were the golden couple." "No, Lily never showed any romantic interest in Ethan. It was more like a strange fascination. Or maybe she felt sorry for him. He was a bit of a loner, despite his arrogance." She paused, then added, "I did see them talking a few times, in the school library. They looked pretty intense. It struck me as odd, given how much she usually avoided him." "Did the police know about this when they investigated her disappearance?" David asked, his mind racing. "Yes, I told them everything I could remember," Chloe confirmed. "They questioned everyone in our class, including Ethan, I'm sure. But by that time, Lily was officially dating Brandon, and he quickly became their main focus. He didn't have a solid alibi for the exact time she went missing, and they were pretty hard on him." "I remember Brandon," David said grimly. "We were suspicious of him, too, for a while. Do you know what happened to him?" "Last I heard, he left Havenwood Creek not long after Lily vanished. The scrutiny was too much for him, I think. He was heartbroken." David looked down at Ethan Vance's smirking face in the magazine, then at his equally confident yearbook photo. Lily, asking if he could change. Lily, wanting to see where he lived. Lily, talking intensely with him in the library. None of this had ever come up during the initial investigation, at least not in any detail that had reached him and Sarah. It had all been about Brandon Knox. "Chloe," David said, his voice low, "this magazine page, Lily tore it out. Do you remember why she might have done that? And why use it as a bookmark in her favorite book?" Chloe stared at the page, her expression troubled. I don't know for sure, but if I had to guess, maybe it was one of those know your enemy things? Or maybe, despite everything, a tiny part of her was intrigued by him, in a way she couldn't explain and didn't like. She could be stubborn, our Lily. If she got an idea into her head, the cold knot in David's stomach tightened. "Do you happen to know if Ethan Vance still lives around here? Or where his family lived back then?" Chloe thought for a moment. "His parents moved away years ago. But Ethan, I think someone mentioned he bought one of those fancy new places up on Eagle Ridge, overlooking the Sound. Uses it as a weekend place, apparently. There was a small alumni get-together a few years back, and his name came up. Someone had his email, I think, for the reunion mailing list. Would you Would you still have that email address by any chance? David asked, trying to keep his voice casual. Chloe looked hesitant. Mr. Peterson, I don't want to cause any trouble, or bring up old pain for no reason. Ethan was a creep, but— I understand, Chloe, David said gently, but after all these years, any little thing. It makes me wonder. He didn't voice the sudden, chilling thought that had taken root. Lily, with her compassionate heart, trying to save someone like Ethan Vance. And what might have happened if she'd gotten too close to a darkness she didn't understand? Reluctantly, Chloe got up and rummaged through a drawer, eventually producing an old address book. She flipped through it and found an email address scribbled next to Ethan V., Alumni. She wrote it down on a slip of paper and handed it to him. "Thank you, Chloe," David said, tucking the paper into his pocket. He stood up, the yearbook and the secret garden still on the table. "Thank you for the coffee and for talking about her." "It was good to see you, Mr. Peterson," Chloe said, her eyes glistening. "Please tell Sarah I said hello, and I hope you find some peace." As David walked back to his car, the image of Ethan Vance's face, both the cocky model and the arrogant student, burned in his mind. A bookmark. A strange fascination, questions Lily had asked. It was all so nebulous, so thin, and yet it was something new. After 22 years of agonizing sameness, it was a thread, however frayed, to pull. And David Peterson, a father who had never stopped searching, was going to pull it. Back in his car, David stared at the slip of paper Chloe had given him. Ethan.vance.designs@globalreach.net. It looked like a business email. He pulled out his smartphone, a piece of technology that hadn't even existed when Lily disappeared, and typed Ethan Vance Designs Seattle into the search bar. Instantly, a sleek, minimalist website appeared. Ethan Vance Designs specialized in high-end branding and marketing for luxury clients. There were photos of Ethan, older now, in his early 40s, but still possessing that same unsettling self-assurance. He was dressed in expensive, tailored suits, shaking hands with important-looking people, his smile polished and professionally charming. The biography lauded his visionary approach and unparalleled success. He was, by all accounts, a man who had meticulously crafted his image. The website also listed an address for his Seattle office, but Chloe had mentioned a weekend place on Eagle Ridge, overlooking the Puget Sound, not far from Havenwood Creek. A quick property search under Ethan Vance Eagle Ridge yielded a result: a contemporary glass and cedar house on a secluded multi-acre lot with panoramic water views. The kind of place that screamed wealth and privacy. David's heart hammered. What was he even thinking? Confronting a successful, powerful man based on a decades-old yearbook photo and a vague recollection from Lily's best friend? It was madness. He should go to the police, tell them what Chloe had said. But what exactly would he tell them? That Lily had once asked if Ethan Vance could change? That she'd been seen talking to him? It was circumstantial at best, laughable at worst. They'd dismiss him as a grieving father clutching at straws, just as they had, perhaps, 22 years ago. If he was going to do this, he had to do it himself, at least initially. He needed to see Ethan Vance, look him in the eye, and gauge his reaction when he mentioned Lily. The drive to Eagle Ridge took nearly an hour. It was an exclusive enclave, the houses large and set far back from the winding, tree-lined road. He found Ethan's address, a long private driveway that disappeared into a grove of mature firs. A discreet modern gate, currently open, marked the entrance. There were no other cars in sight. David parked on the quiet road, a respectful distance from the driveway, his palms sweating. He could just turn around, go home, try to forget this wild goose chase. But the image of Lily's hopeful, trusting face, combined with Chloe's unsettling memories, pushed him forward. He took a deep breath, got out of his car, and walked up the driveway. It curved through the trees, eventually opening up to reveal a stunning house, all sharp angles, vast windows, and natural wood. A high-end sports car was parked near the entrance. As he approached the front door, it opened. Ethan Vance stood there, dressed in casual but expensive-looking linen slacks and a silk shirt. He was taller than David remembered, leaner, his dark hair now artfully styled with silver at the temples. He looked surprised, then mildly annoyed, as if David were an uninvited salesman. "Can I help you?" Ethan asked. His voice smooth, cultured, but with an undercurrent of impatience. "Mr. Vance," David began, trying to keep his own voice steady, "my name is David Peterson. I believe you were in the same graduating class as my daughter, Lily Peterson, at Havenwood High." Ethan's expression didn't change, but David thought he saw a flicker, a tightening around his eyes, so quick it was almost imperceptible. "Peterson?" he repeated, as if dredging the name from a distant, unimportant past. "Lily Peterson. Yes, I vaguely recall the name. Tragic. What happened to her? Disappeared, didn't she?" His tone was professionally sympathetic, yet utterly devoid of genuine emotion. "Yes," David said, his gaze unwavering. "She disappeared 22 years ago. We've never found out what happened." He paused, then pressed on. "I was speaking to her best friend, Chloe Maxwell, earlier today. She mentioned that you and Lily knew each other, perhaps even spent some time talking in the months before she vanished." Ethan's smile became a fraction tighter, his eyes colder. "Mr. Peterson, high school was a long time ago. I barely knew your daughter. We might have exchanged a few words in class, but that would have been the extent of it. I certainly don't recall any significant conversations." He leaned against the doorframe, an air of casual dismissal that David found infuriating. Chloe Maxwell. She always was a bit of a dreamer, wasn't she? Prone to exaggeration. The dismissive tone, the subtle insult to Chloe, stoked a fire in David. Lily also used a picture of you from a magazine as a bookmark in her favorite book, David stated, watching Ethan's face intently. It seemed unusual for someone she barely knew. This time, there was no mistaking the shift. Ethan's eyes narrowed, his polished composure cracking just a little. A muscle twitched in his jaw. "A bookmark? Are you serious? That's what this is about? Mr. Peterson, I'm a busy man. I appreciate your grief, but I fail to see how some misplaced teenaged memorabilia has anything to do with me." His voice had lost its smoothness, replaced by a sharp, defensive edge. "Lily was curious about you, Mr. Vance," David persisted, emboldened by the reaction. "She asked Chloe if you were someone who could change, if you weren't as bad as people thought. She even wanted to see where you lived." Ethan pushed himself off the doorframe, his posture suddenly more aggressive. "This is ridiculous. I have no idea what you're talking about. Your daughter might have had some misguided teenage notions, but that's her business, not mine. I was never her boyfriend, I was never interested in her, and frankly, I don't appreciate these insinuations." He took a step towards David. "I have a reputation, a business to protect. I don't need some grieving father stirring up ancient history and baseless rumors." The hostility was palpable now, radiating off him in waves. It was far more than simple annoyance at an unwelcome intrusion. It was something else, something guarded. "I'm not looking to cause trouble, Mr. Vance," David said, standing his ground, though a tremor of unease ran through him. "I'm just a father looking for answers about his missing child. After 22 years, any small detail, any forgotten memory, could be important." "Well, you won't find any answers here," Ethan snapped, his eyes like chips of ice. "I told the police everything I knew back then, which was nothing, and I have nothing more to say to you now." He gestured dismissively towards the driveway. "You should leave. I have guests arriving shortly." David knew he wouldn't get anything more from him today. Ethan Vance had erected a stone wall, impenetrable and cold, but his very defensiveness, his disproportionate anger, had convinced David more than ever that there was something hidden behind that wall, something connected to Lily. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Vance," David said, his voice carefully neutral. He turned and walked back down the long driveway, the weight of Ethan's hostile gaze pressing into his back. As he reached his car, he glanced back. Ethan Vance was still standing in his doorway, a dark silhouette against the bright interior of his luxurious home, watching him. The image sent a shiver down David's spine. He got into his car, his hands shaking slightly. The encounter had been unsettling, even frightening. Ethan Vance was not just successful, he was cold, calculating, and clearly agitated by David's questions. What had Lily seen in him? And what, if anything, did he know about her disappearance? Driving away from Eagle Ridge, David felt a grim determination solidify within him. He didn't know what his next step would be, but he knew one thing for sure. He was not going to let this go. Ethan Vance was hiding something, and David would find out what it was. The confrontation with Ethan Vance left David feeling both shaken and strangely invigorated. The man's hostile reaction was more telling than 1,000 polite denials. But what now? He drove aimlessly for a while, the lush greenery of the Pacific Northwest a blur outside his window. His mind replayed the conversation. Ethan's cold eyes, the sudden flash of anger. Should he go to Sarah? Tell her about his suspicions? She'd think he was losing his mind, chasing ghosts based on flimsy evidence and a father's desperate hope. She'd plead with him to let it go, to not inflict more pain on their already shattered lives. And the police? Detective Reynolds, who had handled Lily's case all those years ago, was long retired. The new generation of officers at the Havenwood Creek station would likely give him a sympathetic ear, take a cursory report, and file it away. Cold case, they'd call it, insufficient evidence to reopen. He found himself back in the small town center of Havenwood Creek. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows down Main Street. He needed to think, to clear his head. He parked near the waterfront, the salty air and the cries of gulls, a familiar, strangely comforting sound. He walked along the old wooden pier, watching the fishing boats bobbing in the harbor. Lily had loved this pier. They'd spent hours here, fishing for rock cod, her small face alight with excitement at every tug on her line. The memory brought a fresh wave of pain, but also a renewed resolve. He owed it to Lily to pursue this. Ethan Vance's reaction wasn't normal. It was the reaction of a man with something to hide. As he walked back towards his car, his route took him past the town's main hardware store. And then he saw him, Ethan Vance. He was just exiting the store, carrying a brand new shovel, its metal glinting in the sun. He also had a small, dark wooden box tucked under his arm, intricately carved like an antique jewelry box. David froze, his heart leaping into his throat. What on earth would a man like Ethan Vance, with his manicured estate on Eagle Ridge, need with a new shovel and a peculiar wooden box on a weekday afternoon? David instinctively ducked behind a parked truck, his pulse racing. He watched as Ethan loaded the items into the trunk of his sleek sports car. Then, instead of driving off, Ethan walked a few doors down to Pedal Pushers, the town's only florist. David's mind reeled. A shovel, a box, flowers. This couldn't be a coincidence. A few minutes later, Ethan emerged from the florist carrying a large bouquet. Even from this distance, David could see the flowers clearly. White lilies. Lily's favorite flower. A chill, colder than any coastal wind, snaked down David's spine. His breath caught. White lilies. It had to mean something. This was too specific, too symbolic. He felt a surge of adrenaline, a terrifying certainty that he was on the cusp of something monumental, something dreadful. Ethan placed the flowers carefully on the passenger seat of his car, got in, and pulled out onto the main road, heading south away from Eagle Ridge, away from Seattle, towards the more rugged, undeveloped coastline. Without a second thought, David scrambled into his own car. His mind was a maelstrom of fear and frantic speculation. He had to follow him. He had to know where Ethan Vance was going, with a shovel, a mysterious box, and a bouquet of white lilies. Keeping a safe distance, David tailed Ethan's sports car. It was easy enough to follow on the relatively quiet coastal highway. Ethan wasn't driving erratically, but with a focused, deliberate speed. He seemed to know exactly where he was going. They drove for nearly 30 minutes, the landscape becoming wilder, the houses fewer and farther between. The road began to hug the cliffs, offering breathtaking, vertiginous views of the churning Pacific below. This was old logging country, sparsely populated, with narrow, unpaved tracks leading off into the dense forests. Then, Ethan's car signaled a left turn onto one such track. A barely visible dirt road marked only by a weathered, almost illegible wooden sign that might once have indicated a name or a property. The sign was so faded, David couldn't make it out. David's heart pounded. This was isolated territory. He slowed, letting Ethan get further ahead, then carefully turned onto the dirt track himself. The road was rough, rutted, his sedan bouncing precariously. He drove with his headlights off, relying on the fading daylight. The track wound deeper into the thick woods, the trees closing in, creating a claustrophobic tunnel. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 minutes, He saw Ethan's car parked near a dilapidated, overgrown gate. Beyond the gate, barely visible through the dense undergrowth, was the dark shape of a small, isolated cottage. It looked abandoned, its windows boarded up, its paint peeling. The whole place exuded an air of profound neglect and desolation. David pulled his car off the track, concealing it as best he could behind a curtain of thick rhododendron bushes about 100 yards back from the gate. He cut the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the sighing of the wind in the trees and the distant roar of the ocean. He watched as Ethan got out of his car. He retrieved the shovel and the wooden box from the trunk and the bouquet of white lilies from the passenger seat. Then, with a strange, almost ceremonial slowness, Ethan pushed open the creaking gate and walked towards the derelict cottage. He didn't go inside, but instead skirted around it, disappearing into the overgrown woods that sloped down towards the unseen cliffs. David's hands were clammy, his breath coming in shallow gasps. Every instinct screamed at him to call the police. But what would he say? I followed a man who bought a shovel and flowers to an abandoned cottage because he seemed defensive when I asked about my daughter who disappeared 22 years ago. They'd think he was a lunatic. He needed more. He needed proof. Stealthily, he got out of his car. The air was damp and cool, heavy with the scent of decaying leaves and salt. He moved like a shadow, sticking to the deepest cover of the trees, his old hunting skills from years ago kicking in. He had to see what Ethan Vance was doing. He had to know why he had brought those specific items to this God-forsaken place. The silence of the woods was unnerving. Every snap of a twig under his feet sounded like a gunshot. He moved slowly, cautiously, towards the area where Ethan had disappeared. The terrain was uneven, sloping downwards. Through a gap in the trees, he caught a glimpse of the churning gray ocean far below. They were close to the cliff edge. He was following a shadow, a dark premonition leading him into the heart of a nightmare he couldn't yet comprehend, but which he knew, with a chilling certainty, was inextricably linked to his lost Lily. The setting sun cast long, grotesque shadows through the trees, and David felt as if he were stepping into a trap, baited with the ghost of his daughter. The path Ethan Vance had taken was barely discernible, a faint track through dense salal bushes and sword ferns, leading ever closer to the cliff's edge. David followed, his senses on high alert, every nerve ending tingling. The air grew colder, the roar of the waves against the rocks below louder, a constant, mournful percussion. This place felt ancient, untouched by time, a primeval corner of the coast locals referred to with a shiver as Serpent's Point, named for the treacherous currents that writhed around its base. He finally spotted Ethan. He was in a small, natural clearing perilously close to the precipice. The view was starkly beautiful, the vast, restless Pacific stretching to the horizon, the sky bruised with the colors of the fading sunset. But the beauty was lost on David. All he could see was Ethan Vance, the shovel, the box, and the white lilies. Ethan laid the flowers in the box gently on the ground. He surveyed the clearing, his head turning slowly, as if scanning for unseen observers. David pressed himself flatter against the rough bark of a wind-stunted Sitka spruce, praying the deep shadows would conceal him. Ethan seemed satisfied he was alone. He picked up the shovel, and he began to dig. The sound of the shovel biting into the rocky, root-laced soil was sharp, brutal in the quiet of the evening. Ethan worked with a grim, methodical determination, his expensive clothes soon smudged with dirt, his breathing becoming labored. He wasn't digging a large hole, perhaps 2 feet square, and not very deep. David watched, his heart a stone in his chest. What was Ethan burying, or unearthing? The wooden box lay nearby, an ominous enigma. Was it empty, or did it contain something he intended to enter in this desolate spot? After about 20 minutes of strenuous effort, Ethan stopped digging. The hole was perhaps 2 feet deep. He set the shovel aside and knelt beside it. He picked up the small, intricately carved wooden box, his movement slow, almost reverent. He fumbled with a clasp, then opened the lid. From his hiding place, David couldn't see what was inside, but he watched as Ethan reached into the box. The man's expression was unreadable in the fading light. Thoughtful, perhaps, or pained. His lips moved silently, as if he were speaking to himself, or to an unseen presence. He seemed to be shuffling through papers, or photographs, his gaze fixed on whatever he held in his hands. He spent a long time like this, absorbed in the contents of the box. Suddenly, a fierce gust of wind, funneling up from the cliffs, swept across the clearing. It caught the contents of the open box. Several small, light-colored pieces of paper, letters perhaps, or photographs, were snatched by the wind and scattered around the clearing. Ethan cursed a low, vicious sound. He quickly slammed the lid of the box shut, securing the clasp, before scrambling to retrieve the scattered papers. He moved with a frantic urgency, his earlier composure gone, replaced by a raw panic. He gathered them up, stuffing them haphazardly back into his pockets, his eyes darting around as if the wind itself were a malevolent witness. Once he had collected all he could find, he took a deep, steadying breath. He then carefully placed the wooden box into the shallow hole. He picked up the bouquet of white lilies and laid it gently on top of the box. Then he picked up the shovel again and began to fill the hole, covering the box and the flowers with earth. He worked methodically, patting down the soil with the back of the shovel, trying to make the disturbed ground look as natural as possible. When he had finished, he stood over the small, freshly turned mound of earth for a long moment. The last vestiges of daylight were painting the sky in hues of blood orange and deep violet. The wind sighed through the stunted trees. Then Ethan Vance spoke. His voice was low, carried on the wind, but David heard the words as clearly as if he'd been standing beside him. "I think you can hold these memories now, Lily." Lily. The name hit David like a physical blow. He recoiled, his foot slipping on loose scree. He caught himself against the spruce trunk, his hand flying to his mouth to stifle a gasp. His heart hammered against his ribs, so violently he was certain Ethan must hear it. Ethan's head snapped up, his silhouette stark against the dying light. He scanned the surrounding woods, his posture instantly alert, tense as a coiled snake. "Hello?" he called out, his voice sharp with suspicion, cutting through the roar of the waves. "Is someone there?" David remained frozen, scarcely daring to breathe. He pressed himself deeper into the shadows, the rough bark digging into his cheek. He could feel the cold sweat trickling down his back. Ethan picked up the shovel, holding it like a weapon. He took a few hesitant steps towards the trees where David was hiding. He paused, listening intently, his head cocked. Then, another step. David squeezed his eyes shut, bracing himself for discovery. This was it. He'd been a fool. After what felt like an eternity, Ethan stopped. He let out a breath. "Just the wind," he muttered, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. He cast one more suspicious glance around the darkening clearing before gathering the now empty flower wrappings and the shovel. Instead of returning the way he had come, up the faint path near David's hiding spot, Ethan began to walk the perimeter of the clearing, his gaze sweeping the dense undergrowth as if meticulously checking for any sign of intrusion. David held his breath, his muscles screaming from the tension. Finally, apparently satisfied he was alone, Ethan turned and headed back towards the derelict cottage, the shovel over his shoulder. David watched until his dark form was swallowed by the deeper shadows of the woods. He heard the distant creak of the overgrown gate, then, a few moments later, the sound of a car engine starting. Headlights cut a brief swath through the trees as Ethan's sports car turned and drove back down the rough track. David waited, counting slowly to 200. Then 300, to make absolutely sure Ethan wasn't circling back. The clearing was silent now, save for the wind and the waves. The last light had almost gone, plunging Serpent's Point into a deep, unsettling twilight. His legs felt weak, his body trembling from adrenaline and a dawning, horrifying dread. But a desperate, urgent need propelled him forward. He stumbled out from his hiding place, towards the freshly disturbed earth. He needed to know what was in that box. He needed to know why Ethan Vance had spoken his daughter's name, Lily's name, over this lonely makeshift grave on the edge of the world. He found the shovel where Ethan had leaned it against the crumbling wall of the cottage. His hand closed around its wooden handle, the metal still faintly warm. He returned to the small mound of earth, the scent of crushed lilies and damp soil filling his nostrils. His mind was a vortex of fear and unbearable premonition. He had to know. The twilight deepened into an eerie gloom as David stood over the freshly turned earth, the shovel heavy in his trembling hands. The scent of the white lilies, crushed beneath the soil, was cloyingly sweet, a funereal perfume that mingled with the salty tang of the sea and the damp odor of decaying leaves. Every rational thought screamed at him to leave, to go to the police, to tell them what he'd seen, what he'd heard. But a more primal, desperate urge, the cry of a father's broken heart, kept him rooted to the spot. He had to know what Ethan Vance had buried here. He had to know why he'd invoked Lily's name. With a guttural sob that was half prayer, half curse, David plunged the shovel into the soft earth. The digging was easier this time. The soil was loose, recently disturbed. His movements were frantic, fueled by a terrifying urgency. He worked with a desperate haste, casting dirt aside, his breath rasping in his throat. The rhythmic scrape and thud of the shovel was the only sound that seemed to penetrate the roar of the ocean and the frantic thumping of his own heart. Within minutes, the shovel struck something soft, the bouquet of white lilies. He carefully brushed the earth away, his fingers encountering the cool, waxy petals. He lifted the bouquet out. The flowers were bruised, some of them snapped, but their mournful beauty remained. He laid them gently beside the hole. He dug again, more cautiously now, and then the shovel struck something hard, with a dull, hollow thud. The wooden box. His breath hitched. He dropped to his knees, abandoning the shovel, and began to claw at the remaining earth with his bare hands, his fingernails scraping against stone and root. The rough, carved wood of the box emerged. It was small, perhaps a foot long, and half as wide, its dark wood gleaming faintly in the gloom. Just as his fingers closed around the cold metal clasp, a sound made his blood freeze. A twig snapped behind him. Sharp. Close. I knew someone was out here. I had a feeling. David spun around, scrambling to his feet, his heart lurching into his throat. Ethan Vance stood a few yards away, a dark, menacing silhouette against the last vestiges of twilight. His face was contorted in a mask of cold fury. He must have circled back, parked his car down the track, and approached on foot. "You shouldn't have come back, Peterson," Ethan hissed, advancing slowly, his eyes glittering with a chilling mixture of rage and something that looked disturbingly like triumph. "I saw your car, tucked away in the bushes. Thought I'd take a little walk through the woods, just to be sure." "What do you think you're doing?" David gripped the shovel, instinctively raising it slightly, partly as a tool to continue his macabre excavation, partly as a desperate, inadequate weapon. "I heard you," David choked out, his voice hoarse, raw. "I heard you say my daughter's name. What have you buried here, Vance? What does Lily have to do with this?" Ethan's face twisted. "You don't know what you're meddling in. You shouldn't be here." He lunged, not at David, but towards the hole as if to protect its contents. David reacted instinctively, stepping back, turning towards the partially excavated box, determined to uncover its secrets. "I'm going to find out what's in there." "Stop!" Ethan roared. And then David saw it, the glint of dark metal in Ethan's hand, a gun. Small, compact, deadly. Ethan raised it, pointing it directly at David's chest. "Drop the shovel, now." The air crackled with menace. The ocean's roar seemed to fade, replaced by the frantic pounding in David's ears. His mind raced. This was no longer about uncovering a secret, this was about survival. But the thought of Lily, of the answers that lay just inches beneath the soil, gave him a desperate courage. He let the shovel clatter to the ground, but didn't raise his hands. Instead, with a speed born of pure adrenaline, his free hand shot to his pocket, fumbling for his smartphone. "I'm calling the police, Vance," he said, his voice surprisingly steady despite the terror that gripped him. "They need to see this. Go ahead, shoot me. I'll be with my daughter again, but I'm one button away from alerting them. My location is already being tracked." It was a partial bluff. He hadn't activated a tracking app, but the SOS feature was real. With an unexpected lightning-fast movement, Ethan lunged. He didn't shoot. Instead, he swiped at David's hand, knocking the phone from his grasp. The device went skittering across the rocky ground, sliding dangerously close to the cliff's edge. "No!" David shouted, the sight of his lifeline about to tumble into the abyss snapping him into action. He kicked out, his work boot connecting solidly with Ethan's wrist. The gun flew from Ethan's grasp, spinning through the air and disappearing over the cliff into the darkness below. In the same motion, David dove for his phone, his fingers closing around it just as it teetered on the brink. He rolled, clutching it to his chest, and with shaking thumbs found and pressed the emergency SOS button. He knew it would silently alert emergency services and transmit his GPS coordinates. Help was on its way. If he could just stay alive long enough. He scrambled back, away from the increasingly unhinged Ethan Vance, who was now staring at his empty hand, then at the cliff edge where his gun had vanished, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. "Stop this, Vance," David pleaded, his voice cracking. He got to his feet, keeping his distance. "The police are coming. Just tell me the truth. If she's dead, nothing can reverse that now. Hiding the truth won't do anyone any good." "You don't understand," Ethan shrieked, his carefully constructed composure shattering completely. His face was flushed, his eyes wild. "I have my life, my business, my reputation. I can't let this ruin everything. She was nothing, a stupid, naive girl." The callous words, the contempt for Lily, ignited a fresh rage in David. "Did you kill my daughter?" he demanded, his voice breaking with the agony of the question he'd feared for 22 years. If you cared for her, even a little, why would you hurt her? She was my only child." Ethan's expression contorted further, a grotesque parody of pain. "Cared for her?" he spat. "I never knew what I felt for her. She was an obsession. She should have taken better care of herself, stayed away from me. And if you had loved your daughter Peterson, you would have protected her better." "What are you saying?" David asked, horrified by the venom, the victim blaming. "You don't understand. You never knew her like I did." Ethan's words tumbled out, faster now, more frantic. He was breathing heavily, his knuckles white as he clenched and unclenched his fists. "You didn't see the way she looked at me sometimes. She kept coming back, over and over. She couldn't stay away." "Then why didn't you say anything when she went missing?" David yelled, desperate for an answer, any answer that made sense of this madness. "Why bury this out here like a grave?" "She betrayed me in the end," Ethan screamed, his eyes blazing with a terrifying, unholy light. "She said I was broken, that I couldn't be fixed." With a sudden, animalistic roar, Ethan lunged forward again. This time, he didn't aim for the phone. He aimed for David. He was bigger, younger, and fueled by a desperate, cornered animal rage. He slammed into David, knocking him off balance. David stumbled back, his heel catching on a root. He felt strong hands seize him by the throat. David, older and less physically powerful, couldn't break free from Ethan's iron grip. He clawed at Ethan's wrists, gasping for air as the younger man's fingers tightened around his neck, cutting off his breath. Black spots began to dance before his eyes. The roar of the ocean seemed to recede, replaced by a rushing sound in his ears. Was this how it ended? Murdered on a desolate cliff, his daughter's secrets still buried in the earth? Just as his vision began to tunnel, a distant, high-pitched wail cut through the night. Faint at first, then growing louder, clearer. Police sirens. Ethan's grip loosened almost imperceptibly. His head turned towards the sound, panic flaring in his wild eyes. The sirens were getting closer, racing up the private track towards the cottage. The wail of the sirens, slicing through the coastal quiet, was the most beautiful sound David had ever heard. Ethan Vance's grip on his throat slackened in surprise and panic, allowing David to suck in a ragged, desperate gasp of air. Within moments, the clearing was bathed in the flashing red and blue lights of multiple police vehicles that had navigated the rough track with surprising speed. Figures emerged, weapons drawn, voices sharp and commanding. "Police, let him go. Step back with your hands where we can see them," an officer yelled. Ethan, startled and momentarily disoriented, released David and stumbled back, slowly raising his hands. The fight drained out of him, replaced by a dazed terror. Two officers moved in swiftly, expertly securing his wrists with handcuffs, reciting his Miranda rights in a clipped, professional tone. David slumped to the ground, coughing violently, massaging his bruised throat. His body ached, his mind reeled, but a profound, exhausted relief washed over him. A female officer, her face calm and reassuring, knelt beside him. "Are you all right, sir?" She helped him to his feet. "Yes," David managed, his voice raspy. "Thank you. He buried something. There." He pointed a shaking finger towards the freshly disturbed earth, the shallow hole, the discarded shovel. "He mentioned my daughter's name, Lily Peterson. She disappeared 22 years ago." The officer's expression became instantly serious. "Peterson, I remember that case file. It's legendary around the station. Let me get Detective Ramirez over here." While a few officers moved to secure the scene, stringing up crime scene tape by flashlight, a tall, stern-faced woman in plain clothes approached David. This was Detective Maria Ramirez, head of Havenwood Creek's small investigative unit. She handed David back his phone, which another officer had retrieved from near the cliff edge. "Mr. Peterson, I'm Detective Ramirez. Can you tell me what happened here?" Her voice was calm, authoritative, but with an undercurrent of compassion. Leaning against a patrol car for support, his body still trembling, David recounted everything. Finding the yearbook, the note about the secret garden, his visit to Chloe Maxwell, the unsettling bookmark with Ethan Vance's picture. He described his confrontational visit to Ethan's house on Eagle Ridge, Ethan's disproportionate anger. Then, the chilling purchases, the shovel, the carved wooden box, the white lilies. He explained how he'd followed Ethan to this desolate spot, Serpent's Point, and witnessed the bizarre burial. He recounted Ethan's chilling words. "I think you can hold these memories now, Lily." And finally, the violent confrontation when Ethan had returned. "I know I shouldn't have followed him, Detective," David admitted, his voice hoarse. "I should have called you sooner, but when I saw him buy that shovel, and those white lilies, Lily's favorite flowers, something just didn't feel right. I had to know." Detective Ramirez nodded, her expression unreadable in the flickering lights. "You said he buried a wooden box in the flowers, and that the wind blew some papers out of the box before he closed it?" David nodded. "Yes, and he said something about Lily holding these memories. It sounded like he'd been keeping these things for a long time and was only now interring them." The detective motioned to a forensic team that had arrived, their van filled with specialized equipment. "Let's see what Mr. Vance thought Lily should hold on to." Under the harsh glare of portable floodlights, the forensic team meticulously began to excavate the site. David watched, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach with every scrape of their trowels. Sarah. He needed to call Sarah, but not yet. Not until he knew. The first item they uncovered was the bouquet of white lilies, already wilting, their pristine white petals smudged with earth. They were carefully bagged as evidence. Beneath them lay the dark, intricately carved wooden box. A lead forensic technician, wearing gloves, opened the box carefully. Detective Ramirez leaned in, her flashlight beam illuminating its contents. David, drawn by an irresistible compulsion, moved closer, peering over her shoulder. The box was filled with a strange assortment of items, all slightly yellowed and bearing the patina of age. There was a stack of what appeared to be printed text messages, or what passed for them in the early 90s, perhaps pager messages or early internet chat logs. There were several photographs, handwritten notes, and a small, rather crudely made woolen doll, the kind a child might make in a craft class. It looked disturbingly familiar. Lily had made one just like it in 4th grade. "He just buried this," David rasped, pointing to the box. "But he implied Lily could have it now. That means he's been keeping these things at his home, or somewhere safe, all this time." Detective Ramirez, also gloved, began to carefully examine the contents. The first items she picked up were the printouts of messages. As she read through them, her expression grew increasingly troubled, her lips tightening into a thin, grim line. "Mr. Peterson," she said gently, without looking up, "these messages, they suggest that Ethan Vance and your daughter Lily had a secret relationship during their senior year of high school." David's breath caught. A secret relationship? Lily had never said a word. Ramirez continued, "It appears it was complicated and deeply troubling." She passed a few of the printouts to another officer to be photographed and bagged. The messages, a mixture of typed exchanges and handwritten notes, painted a horrifying picture. They revealed a clandestine involvement that neither David nor Sarah nor even Chloe had fully known about. According to the texts and notes, Ethan had relentlessly pursued Lily. He'd been charming, manipulative, preying on her compassionate nature, her desire to see the good in everyone. There were mentions of secret meetings, of Ethan pressuring Lily to keep their interactions hidden, especially from Chloe. One series of messages detailed an incident where Ethan had kissed Lily without her consent. Her initial upset was evident, followed by his apologies and her gradual, reluctant forgiveness, her misguided belief that she could somehow help him, change him. Lily's words, in her familiar girlish script on some of the notes, were heartbreaking. She repeatedly told Ethan she believed he could be a better person, that he just needed someone to love him and believe in him. But Ethan's responses, when present, were controlling, filled with emotional blackmail, using her affection without ever truly reciprocating it in a healthy way. He played on her sympathies, her desire to fix what was broken. This went on for nearly a year, off and on, Detective Ramirez noted, her voice low and grim as she carefully turned over more items. Then it seems Lily tried to end things definitively. The later messages and notes showed Lily's growing frustration, her dawning realization of the toxic nature of their secret entanglement. When she finally broke things off completely, around the time she started openly and happily dating Brandon Knox, Ethan's messages became increasingly desperate, then angry, then overtly threatening. "You'll regret this, Lily," one of his notes read. "You belong to me." Among the items in the box were several Polaroid photographs. When Detective Ramirez carefully lifted them, David turned away, a strangled cry escaping his lips. They were explicit, disturbing pictures of Lily. In some, she appeared to be asleep or unconscious. In others, her eyes were wide with a terror that seared itself into David's soul. She looked younger, vulnerable. The backgrounds were rustic, showing the interior of what looked like the derelict cottage they were currently at, as well as various locations in the surrounding woods near the cliffs. Detective Ramirez quickly covered these photos, her face a mask of professional composure, but her eyes flashed with anger. She turned them over to examine the backs. Each one had handwriting scrawled across it. Jason's, they presumed. One photo had the same chilling sentence repeated dozens of times, filling the entire back. "You will love me. You will love me. You will love me." Another bore the inscription, "Our special place. You'll never leave me here. Yours forever, E." The most disturbing was on the back of a photo where Lily's face showed clear, unadulterated fear. Here, Ethan had written a rambling, incoherent note about how he couldn't keep it together anymore, that people were starting to ask questions about Lily's whereabouts. This must have been after she was reported missing, and that she, referred to with a string of vile profanities, refused to see reason and come back to him. The note ended with a chilling, almost casual statement. "Had to make you quiet. They'll never find you. You're mine always. Sorry, Elle. But you made me do it. We'll need to question Vance about the specifics of how he killed her," Detective Ramirez said quietly to another officer. He doesn't explicitly state the method in these notes, but the implication is clear. As they continued to sift through the horrifying contents of the box, a lock of blonde hair tied with a ribbon, the small woolen doll, more notes filled with obsessive rantings, another team of officers, who had been conducting a wider search of the immediate cliffside area, approached urgently. "Detective," one of them said, her voice grim, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, "we found something. About 20 yards from here, further down the slope, near that outcrop of rocks. There's an area where the soil composition is different, looser. We did a preliminary excavation, and we found bone fragments." David's legs gave way. He sank to his knees on the cold, damp earth, the world spinning around him. Bone fragments. Lily. After 22 years of agonizing uncertainty, of clinging to slivers of false hope, the unspeakable truth was finally, brutally emerging from the cold, unforgiving earth of Serpent's Point. His Lily. Here. All this time. The contents of the box were a chronicle of her torment, and just yards away, the forensic team, with grim efficiency, expanded their search, carefully digging in the area the officer had indicated. As the night wore on, under the cold, indifferent stars, they uncovered more and more. The fragmented, broken remains of what had once been his vibrant, laughing daughter. The discovery of Lily's remains transformed Serpent's Point from a place of chilling premonition into a scene of unbearable, tangible horror. David remained on his knees, the cold dampness of the earth seeping into his clothes, his body numb, his mind a vortex of images. Lily's smiling face in the yearbook, her terrified eyes in Ethan Vance's grotesque photographs, the small, innocent woolen doll she had made, now a relic from a nightmare. Detective Ramirez approached him, her earlier professional composure softened by a deep, human sorrow. "Mr. Peterson," she said gently, "would you like us to call your wife? She needs to know." David nodded mutely, his throat too constricted for words. "And Chloe," he managed to rasp out. "Chloe Maxwell. She was Lily's best friend. She deserves to know too. He couldn't bear the thought of Sarah hearing this news from a stranger, or over the phone without him. He had to be the one to tell her, but he needed a moment to gather the shattered remnants of his strength. While another officer made the calls, Detective Ramirez updated him on Ethan Vance. He's being transported to the county jail. He hasn't said much yet, but he lawyered up immediately. However, she added, gesturing towards the meticulously collected contents of the wooden box, now bagged and labeled as evidence. This speaks volumes. This is a confession in its own right, premeditated, obsessive, and utterly depraved. As they waited for Sarah and Chloe to arrive, the detective suggested David might be more comfortable waiting at the station or in one of the patrol cars. He refused. "No," he said, his voice surprisingly firm, though laced with an unbearable pain. "I need to stay here. They should see this, all of it, before anything is moved. We've waited 22 years for answers. I need to see this through to the end." He knew it was a grotesque request, but the need to bear witness, to honor Lily in this desolate place, was overwhelming. The first headlights to appear, nearly an hour later, belonged to a patrol car bringing Chloe. She stumbled out, her face pale and tear-streaked, her eyes wide with disbelief and dawning horror as she took in the grim scene, the floodlights, the forensic team, the yellow crime scene tape. She saw David and ran to him, collapsing into his arms in a paroxysm of sobs. "No, no, it can't be," she wept, her grief raw and unrestrained. "Not Lily, not here." A few minutes later, another car arrived. Sarah. David saw her silhouette emerge, hesitant, afraid. He gently disentangled himself from Chloe and walked towards his wife, his heart aching with the news he had to deliver. He met her halfway, taking her cold hands in his. "Sarah," he began, his voice breaking. They found her. They found Lily." Sarah's eyes, so like Lily's, searched his, desperate for a different answer. But she saw the truth in his ravaged face. A low, keening sound escaped her lips, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony before she sagged against him, her body racked with sobs that seemed to tear her apart. Detective Ramirez approached them, her expression somber. She gently explained what they had found, the box, its horrifying contents, and the nearby grave. The three of them, David, Sarah, and Chloe, stood together at the edge of the cordoned-off area, united in a grief that was almost unbearable, as the full, horrific extent of what had happened to Lily was laid bare. "We want to move her remains from here," Sarah said, her voice shaking but determined, her eyes fixed on the forensic team still working under the lights. "She deserves a proper burial, somewhere peaceful. Not this terrible place where he left her. We'll arrange for that as soon as the forensic team completes their work here," Detective Ramirez assured her gently. "It shouldn't be more than a day or two." Chloe stepped closer to the excavation site, tears streaming down her cheeks. Her voice broke as she whispered, "Why didn't you tell me, Lily? We were best friends. I could have helped you. We used to talk about girls who fell for guys like Ethan, those manipulative types, and we'd laugh about how we'd never be so foolish." I don't understand." Her words were a lament for lost innocence, for secrets kept, for a friendship brutally severed. Later that night, or rather, in the early hours of the morning, after Lily's remains had been respectfully removed and transported to the county medical examiner's office, Detective Ramirez met with David and Sarah at the quiet, sterile police station. Chloe had gone home, emotionally and physically exhausted, promising to return. Ethan Vance confessed. Ramirez told them quietly, her voice heavy. "Once his lawyer arrived and we laid out the evidence from the box, he broke. He gave us the full story." According to Ethan's confession, his obsession with Lily had begun in their junior year. He had systematically groomed her, preying on her kindness and her naive belief that she could fix him. He had isolated her, manipulated her, and when she had tried to pull away, particularly after starting her relationship with Brandon Knox, his obsession had turned possessive and violent. He abducted her a few days after her graduation party, Ramirez explained, her voice gentle but factual. He lured her to the cottage at Serpent's Point, a place his family had owned but rarely used, under the pretext of wanting to talk, to apologize for his past behavior. He kept her captive there for several days. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. David tightened his arm around her. He said he tried to convince her to run away with him. Ramirez continued. Promised to make their relationship official, to cherish her, if she would just break up with Brandon and tell everyone she had gone on a solo trip to celebrate graduation. But Lily refused. She told him that after years of trying to believe in him, of hoping he could change, she had finally realized he was, in her words, broken beyond repair, and that she wanted nothing more to do with him. The detective paused, her gaze compassionate. Vance said her words, her defiance, enraged him. He admitted they got into a physical altercation when Lily tried to escape. They struggled near the cliff's edge. According to Vance, Lily fought back fiercely, even managing to injure him. In his rage, he overpowered her. He struck her multiple times with a heavy rock until she was no longer moving. A choked sob escaped Sarah. David held her tighter, his own body rigid with a cold, consuming fury. When he realized she was dead, Ramirez concluded, he panicked. Instead of calling for help, he buried her body in a shallow grave near the cottage, hoping she would never be found. He kept the box, with her personal items and his mementos hidden at his main residence on Eagle Ridge all these years. He said he brought it to Serpent's Point yesterday because he'd been having nightmares, feeling haunted. He decided to bury it with her, a sort of twisted final offering, to give her back her memories and perhaps to try and find some peace for himself. Amy, who had rejoined them, wiped away fresh tears. I remember when Lily started asking me about Ethan, wondering if he could change. I told her he was bad news. I never understood why she was so interested in him when I knew how much she usually disliked people like him. I had no idea they were secretly involved to that extent. No idea it was so dark. She turned to David and Sarah, her voice filled with remorse. I'm so sorry. If I had known more, maybe I could have warned her more strongly, protected her somehow. None of this is your fault, Chloe, Sarah said firmly, her voice regaining some of its strength. Ethan Vance was a predator. He was manipulative and dangerous. Lily believed she could help him, and he took advantage of her compassion, her beautiful, trusting heart. Detective Reynolds, the retired officer who had initially investigated Lily's disappearance, had heard the news and come to the station to offer his support. He shook his head sadly. Since Lily never publicly dated him, and Vance had no prior record, our investigation focused elsewhere. Brandon Knox, being her known boyfriend at the time, and his initially shaky alibi, made him our prime suspect. Vance, he just blended back into the woodwork, went off to college, built his life. No one ever looked his way again with any real suspicion, until now. The unspeakable truth was out. Lily hadn't just vanished. She had been stolen, her life brutally extinguished by a disturbed young man's obsession. The what-ifs would haunt them forever, but the agonizing uncertainty, the not knowing, was finally over. Lily had been found. A week later, a small flotilla of boats gathered off the coast of Havenwood Creek, just below the rugged cliffs of Serpent's Point. The day was unusually clear for the Washington coast, the sun brilliant on the gently swelling surface of the Pacific. The raw, oppressive grief of the previous week had not lessened, but it had subtly shifted, making room for a somber ceremony of remembrance. In the lead boat, a sturdy local fishing charter, stood David and Sarah Peterson, their faces etched with sorrow but also a quiet resolve. Chloe Maxwell was beside them, her arm linked through Sarah's lant. Detective Ramirez, who had overseen the final heartbreaking resolution of Lily's case, and the now frail Detective Reynolds, were also present, offering their silent support. In the boats that followed were Lily's former classmates, teachers, and the principal from Havenwood High, their presence a testament to a community still mourning a light extinguished too soon. The news of Ethan Vance's arrest, his confession, and the discovery of Lily's remains had sent shockwaves through Havenwood Creek. The town, which had never fully healed from her disappearance, was now grappling with the brutal reality of her murder. Ethan Vance, a name once associated with youthful arrogance and later distant success, was now synonymous with monstrous evil. David held a small, simple urn in his hands. After careful, agonizing consideration, he and Sarah had decided against a traditional cemetery burial. Lily had loved the ocean, its vastness, its untamed spirit. She had dreamed of studying its depths. They would release her ashes here, freeing her from the dark earth of Serpent's Point, committing her to the element she had adored. A local minister, A woman with a kind face and gentle voice began the service. Today, we gather to finally say goodbye to Lily Peterson, a beloved daughter, a cherished friend, a bright spirit taken from us far too soon. For 22 years, her family and friends have carried the unendurable weight of her absence, the torment of not knowing. Today, though our hearts are heavy with sorrow, we lay down that burden of uncertainty. We commit Lily's remains to the sea she loved, where she will never again be bound or restrained, but will be free, wild, and at peace. Sarah stepped forward to stand beside David, her hand resting on his arm as he prepared to open the urn. Her voice, though trembling, carried clearly across the water to the other boats. Lily loved this ocean more than anything. She was going to be a marine biologist. She would have loved knowing that she'll become part of the sea she so adored, part of its beauty, its mystery, its endless cycles of life. Together, David and Sarah tilted the urn, and Lily's ashes, a fine gray powder, drifted out on the breeze, scattering onto the sun-dappled waves. A collective sigh, a release of held breath, seemed to emanate from the gathered boats. White lilies, handfuls of them, followed, tossed from every boat, creating a floating, ephemeral garden on the surface of the ocean. Chloe came forward, tears streaming down her face. In her hands, she held the worn, silver-leafed copy of The Secret Garden. With a small, choked sob, she placed the book gently on the waves. It floated for a moment, then slowly began to absorb the water, sinking into the blue depths. "Goodbye, my friend," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry I never returned your book. May you find your own secret garden, peaceful and beautiful, wherever you are." After the ceremony, as the boats made their slow, somber way back to shore, Detective Ramirez approached the Petersons with a final update. Ethan Vance has been formally charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and multiple counts of sexual assault. Given the evidence from the box and his full confession, the prosecutor is confident of a conviction. He will never see the outside of a prison again. It was small comfort, but it was justice. A measure of it, at least. Nothing could bring Lily back, but the man who had stolen her life would pay for his crimes. That evening, David and Sarah sat on their back porch, the same porch where Lily had spent countless summer afternoons reading. The sun was setting over the distant Olympic Mountains, painting the sky in hues of soft pink and lavender. Sarah had placed a framed photograph of Lily on the small table between them, not the formal senior portrait from the yearbook, but a candid shot David had taken on a family camping trip. Lily, about 16, laughing, her hair tousled by the wind, her face alight with pure, unadulterated joy, a fishing rod in her hand and a ridiculous oversized hat on her head. "I think," Sarah said softly, her voice still fragile, but no longer choked with the rawest edge of grief, "I think we can finally start to move forward now." She reached for David's hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "Not by forgetting her, never by forgetting, but by remembering her as she truly was, vibrant, loving, full of compassion, and so incredibly alive." David squeezed her hand, his gaze fixed on Lily's laughing face. "She was so much like you, you know," he said, a tear tracing a path down his weathered cheek. "That desire to see the good in people, to believe everyone deserved a chance, to help them be better. And she had your stubbornness?" Sarah replied, a faint, sad smile touching her lips. "Once she decided someone, or something, was worth fighting for, worth saving, nothing could change her mind." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the shared grief no longer an unscalable wall between them, but a deep, sorrowful bond that had weathered the worst life could throw at them. The terrible ache in their hearts would never fully disappear, but the sharp, agonizing edge of uncertainty had been blunted. "I keep thinking about how young she was," David said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "How innocent, despite everything. She believed in the power of love, of kindness, to transform even the darkest souls." "It's not a bad thing to believe in, David," Sarah responded gently. "The world needs more people willing to see the potential for good in others. Lily's mistake, her tragedy, wasn't in believing people could change. It was in thinking she alone, with her compassionate heart, could make it happen for someone as broken and manipulative as Ethan Vance." David nodded, understanding the profound, painful truth in her words. "I just wish she had told us more about him, about how he was making her feel. Maybe we could have helped her see the danger, protected her. "We'll never know, my love," Sarah said, her voice a soothing balm. "We'll torture ourselves with what-ifs for the rest of our days. But I hope, that wherever she is now, she knows how much we loved her. And she knows we never, ever stopped looking for her." As darkness fell over Havenwood Creek, and the first stars began to prick the vast, clear night sky, David thought about the incredible, agonizing journey that had begun just over a week ago when he'd opened that old yearbook. How a simple, innocent note about a borrowed book, a faded photograph used as a bookmark, had unraveled a 22-year-old mystery, leading them through a labyrinth of forgotten memories and chilling discoveries to a truth more horrifying than they could have imagined. The mystery of Lily's disappearance was solved, but the deeper mystery of how to live with such a profound and violent loss remained. Yet, for the first time in over 2 decades, David felt a flicker, not of happiness, but of a quiet, somber peace. Lily had been found. She was no longer lost in the terrifying unknown, but part of the wild, beautiful sea she had loved, her spirit, he hoped, finally free and unconfined. David and Sarah Peterson would continue to live, to remember, and perhaps, finally, slowly, begin to heal, carrying their daughter's bright, loving memory in their hearts, an echo in the mist that would never truly fade.